Long before ancient Greece became famous for philosophers, temples, and myths, there was another civilization rising from the islands of the Aegean Sea. They built massive palaces, painted walls with dolphins, bulls, and bright colors, created one of Europe's earliest writing systems, traded across the sea, and lived dangerously close to one of the most powerful volcanoes in the ancient world. Then, something changed. A massive eruption shook the Aegean. Earthquakes struck. Tsunamis may have followed. Palaces declined. And over time, this powerful island civilization faded from history. Some believe the memory of this world may have helped inspire the legend of Atlantis. But who were the Minoans? And were they really the civilization behind the myth? Welcome to Lost and Explained TV. Today we're traveling back more than 3,000 years to the island of Crete, home of the mysterious Minoan civilization. The Minoans were not Greek in the later classical sense. They came before much of what we usually think of as ancient Greece. Before Athens became powerful, before the Parthenon stood on the Acropolis, before Plato wrote about Atlantis, the Minoans were already building palaces, sailing the Mediterranean, and creating art that still looks alive today. Their world was advanced, colorful, and connected by the sea. But it was also fragile, because just north of Crete sat Thera, now known as Santorini, a volcanic island that would one day explode with terrifying force. The Minoans lived mainly on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age. Their civilization reached its height roughly between 2000 and 1500 BCE, although Minoan culture existed before and after that period. Unlike later Greek city-states, the Minoans seem to have centered much of their society around large palace complexes. The most famous of these was Knossos. Knossos was not just a royal home, it was a center of administration, religion, storage, trade, and ceremony. The palace had courtyards, stairways, painted rooms, storage magazines, and a complex layout that may have helped inspire later myths of the labyrinth. In Greek mythology, Crete was associated with King Minos, the Minotaur, and a maze built by Daedalus. That is where the name Minoan comes from. But the real Minoans were not just mythological figures. They were artists, sailors, builders, traders, farmers, and religious people whose culture shaped the ancient Aegean world. One of the most striking things about the Minoans is their art. Their walls were covered in frescoes showing dolphins, fish, flowers, birds, processions, and bull-leaping scenes. Unlike many ancient civilizations that focused heavily on war scenes, Minoan art often feels full of movement, nature, and ceremony. Their paintings show people with elegant clothing, jewelry, and elaborate hairstyles. Their pottery was decorated with marine life, octopuses, shells, seaweed, and flowing wave patterns. Everything about Minoan art suggests a culture deeply connected to the sea. And that makes sense. Crete sits in the eastern Mediterranean, between Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Minoans were positioned perfectly for trade. They likely exchanged goods with Egypt, the Cycladic Islands, mainland Greece, Cyprus, and the Near East. Their ships helped connect them to the wider Bronze Age world. But even with all their art and ruins, the Minoans remain mysterious. One major reason is their writing. The Minoans used a script known today as Linear A. Archaeologists have found Linear A on tablets, seals, and other objects. But unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or later Greek writing, Linear A has never been fully deciphered. That means we still cannot easily read the Minoans in their own words. We do not know exactly what they called themselves. We do not fully understand their religion. We do not know all the details of their politics, laws, or daily life. We can study their buildings, art, tools, and trade goods, but their voices are still partly locked away. That mystery makes the Minoans feel like a civilization half-lit by history, visible enough to fascinate us, but hidden enough to keep us guessing. The Minoans lived in a beautiful but dangerous region. The Aegean is shaped by earthquakes, volcanoes, and shifting land. And one island in particular would become central to the Minoan mystery: Thera, modern Santorini. Today, Santorini is famous for white buildings, blue domes, cliffs, and sunsets. But its beauty hides a violent volcanic past. During the Bronze Age, Thera erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic events of the ancient Mediterranean. The eruption buried the settlement of Akrotiri under volcanic ash and pumice. Because of that ash, parts of Akrotiri were preserved for thousands of years, almost like a Bronze Age time capsule. Buildings, paintings, pottery, streets, and storage vessels survived beneath the volcanic material. It was not Atlantis, but it was a real ancient settlement suddenly frozen by disaster. For a long time, people imagined the story like this. The volcano erupted. A tsunami struck Crete. The Minoan civilization collapsed, and the memory of that disaster became the story of Atlantis. It is a dramatic idea, and parts of it may be true. The eruption of Thera likely had serious effects across the Aegean. Ash may have damaged crops. Earthquakes may have shaken cities. Tsunamis may have struck coastal areas. Trade routes may have been disrupted. But history is rarely that simple. The Minoans did not instantly vanish overnight. Knossos and other sites continued for some time after the eruption. The decline of Minoan civilization appears to have been more complicated. It may have involved natural disasters, economic disruption, political instability, earthquakes, fires, and the growing influence of the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Eventually, the Mycenaeans became dominant on Crete, so the eruption may have weakened the Minoans. But it probably was not the only cause of their decline. So why do people connect the Minoans to Atlantis? Because the similarities are hard to ignore. Atlantis was described as a powerful island civilization. The Minoans were an advanced island civilization. Atlantis was connected to the sea. The Minoans were expert sailors and traders. Atlantis was associated with wealth, power, and impressive architecture. The Minoans built large palaces and produced beautiful art. Atlantis was destroyed by earthquakes and floods. The Minoan world was affected by earthquakes, volcanic activity, and possibly tsunamis. And the Santorini eruption created a real image of a thriving Bronze Age settlement buried by catastrophe. That sounds close to the Atlantis story. But there is a problem. Plato wrote about Atlantis many centuries after the height of the Minoans. His Atlantis was described as being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, usually understood as the region near the Strait of Gibraltar, far west of Greece. Santorini and Crete are in the Aegean Sea, much closer to Greece. The timeline also does not match perfectly. So the Minoans may have inspired parts of the Atlantis legend, but they were probably not Plato's Atlantis in a literal sense. Even if the Minoans were not Atlantis, their story may be more interesting because it was real. They were one of the great civilizations of the Bronze Age Aegean. They built complex palaces, created unforgettable art, used a writing system we still cannot fully read, traded across the sea, and lived through natural disasters that reshaped their world. Their civilization reminds us that history is not always a straight line. Cultures rise, they adapt, they influence others, and sometimes they fade into something new. The Minoans did not disappear completely. Their ideas, art, myths, and memories lived on in the cultures that came after them. The Greeks remembered Crete through stories of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur. And maybe, just maybe, echoes of the Minoan world survived in another story. The story of Atlantis. So, were the Minoans the lost civilization behind Atlantis? The answer is, maybe partly. They were not Atlantis exactly, but they may have helped inspire the legend. Their world had everything a great mystery needs: a powerful island civilization, beautiful cities, strange writing, ancient myths, a devastating volcanic eruption, and a decline that still leaves questions behind. Atlantis may be a myth, but the Minoans were real, and sometimes the real story is just as mysterious as the legend. What do you think? Was Atlantis inspired by the Minoans, or was Plato telling a completely fictional warning story? Comment your theory below and subscribe to Lost and Explained TV for more history, science, mysteries, lost civilizations, and strange facts explained.